Well, thank you, Rohan, and my thanks to the final lecture committee for all your hard work. I want to also thank all you students for bringing this honor to me. I got a little interview today by someone from the Plainsmen, and one of the questions I was asked is, how did you think you got that award? And I've wondered the same thing, I really have. I was talking about it to some of my family, who I'll introduce to you in just a minute, and one of them kind of put it into perspective. They said, well, Dad, they voted for you because they thought the final lecture either meant that you were about to die or you were going to retire, and you'd get a lot of votes for that. And so, and if that's why you voted for me, I still thank you, but I am sorry to disappoint you in that regard. Did want to introduce my family. My wife Nancy is sitting there. We have 3 children, Jeff and Judd and Karen. And then the boys are married, and so I have the additional blessing of 2 more daughters, and Tricia and Meredith. So they're all here today. We also have 5 grandchildren, but for sake of chaos, we did not bring them here today. You know, I graduated from college on June 6, 1966. That's 6/6/66. That's kind of an ominous date, isn't it? But anyway, that's when I graduated, and it'd soon be 43 years ago that I graduated from college. And as I was thinking about, well, what should I talk about today, I kind of reflected back to June 6, 1966. I kind of thought about that day and thought, well, what are some things I wish someone had told me that day when I graduated? You know, things maybe I have a different perspective on now that I've been a professor at Auburn for now this well over 40 years. And since I graduated on 6/6/66, I thought it would just be consistent to talk about 6 things that I wish that someone had told me when I graduated from college. Well, the first one that I wish I had heard was for someone to say that I should expect and embrace change. You know, I thought a little bit about the things that have changed since I've been at Auburn. When I came to Auburn, you could go to the movie for $2. Gasoline was at 60 cents, and we were all complaining about it. A stamp cost 13 cents. Auburn University had just over 17,000 students, and this one is the most amazing. Tuition was $540 a year. Bring those days back, eh? Lots of things have changed. One of the things I thought about was that the number of presidents under whom I've served. And I'm serving under the 8th president. So lots of things have changed at Auburn. But you know, things are going to change for you in your future as well. Rohan alluded to the mammalian physiology class, and those of you that have been my students know that I like a question that says increase, decrease, no effect. So I got to thinking about, well, what things might increase in your near future? Well, one that you're probably looking forward to is probably, how about salary? You'd like to see that increase, wouldn't you? I suggest that you start better than I did, if that's what you want to do. When I got done with graduate school, I was finished with my degree. I had used up all of my fellowship. I had used up all of my GI Bill. And our only family income was Nancy working part-time as a secretary. I came to Auburn, I got an interview, and they actually offered me the job at the end of the interview. Now, when I came, I had thought, I am not going to take a job for less than $10,000 a year. And that's about what postdocs were paying right about that time. I thought, I'm not going to take less than a postdoc, but I really wanted a real job. So anyway, the interview was over, and the department chair, Dr. Kirby Hayes, looked at me and said, well, Dr. Witt, we're going to offer you a job. And he said, we're going to offer you $14,040 a year. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm not a person that likes to negotiate the price of anything. That's just not me. You know, tell me what it costs, and I'll either buy it or not buy it. But anyway, I decided for whatever reason, I have no idea. I said, well, I'll think about that, and I'd kind of like to talk to my wife about it, if you don't mind. All of a sudden, this little voice said, Larry, what other options do you have? And so, trying to be kind of this negotiating posture, I looked at him and said, but I'll call her right now if you want me to. I started for $14,040. But my salary has gone up. Another thing that's going to change or going to increase for you is your expenses. When I got that, I couldn't believe what I could do with all that money in a single year. I thought actually I'd probably give some back to graduate students or something like that. But I found out about things like taxes and health insurance, and we started having kids, and boy, expenses really went up. Some of you are probably looking forward to the freedom that you're going to have after you graduate, and indeed you will. You'll be your own person at that point. But I also have to tell you that responsibility also will increase, probably more than your freedom. Another thing I thought about or read a little bit about this week or so was that you probably will have a lot more different jobs than I ever will have. One of my sons is sitting down here, and he's already worked for 3 different organizations since he's been out of college. It's not that he can't keep a job. I mean, he's wanted to do that. He's done 3, and that's already more than my father and I combined ever had in our working lifetime. My dad worked for a company for 42 years, and I've been here at Auburn. Now I'm in my 34th year. Another thing that's changing incredibly is just the amount of information. I read that in the past year that there has been 1.5 exabytes of information that have come out in the last year. I didn't know what an exabyte was even, but it's 10 to the 18th of new information that's come out in the past year. And we certainly are living in exponential times. Well, those are some things that would increase. How about some things that would decrease? What's one? Tests, exams. I was with some students just last night, and a couple of them were talking to each other, and they said, do you realize that we only have 4 more tests in our whole time at Auburn? That's a great feeling. I can remember distinctly when I got finished with my PhD orals, and I walked out of that room, they told me I'd passed. I had this feeling of euphoria, but the greatest thing is I'm not going to have a lot more tests. Some faculty will tell you, well, it's as hard to make up a test as it is to take one. They're lying. They really are. I want to assure you it's better to give than it is to receive. Another thing as a physiologist that changes and decreases is that the number of neurons that you have in your brain is decreasing. After a certain age, and I'm beyond that age, it's estimated that you might lose up to 10,000 neurons per day. Someone has said that by the age of 90, that your cerebrum, that's really the thinking part of your brain, will only be about 45% of the mass that it once was. That's disturbing. Now, what was the next point? Well, another thing that'll change is just the amount of free time that you'll have. Students are busy, and I don't discount that. But I got some bad news for you. When you start working, it doesn't get any better at all. The amount of free time just seems to decline and decline. I can identify with a person that said, I'm 32 years old next month. When I divide that by 2, I'm 15 and a half. Believe it or not, that was just yesterday. Double it, and I'm 62. Believe it or not, I think that's tomorrow. Sometime yesterday morning, my son was born. Today he's almost a year old. Tomorrow he'll be 15. Where does it go? What's happened to the dreams? And you know something else? I know less today than I did yesterday, and probably more than I will know tomorrow. Zoom. There it goes. There I go. So expect change, but embrace change. I tried to think of something I could think of that had no effect, and I really couldn't think of it. And so things will change, and change indeed. A second thing that I wish they'd told me when I graduated was that it's often necessary to fail. How about you? How do you respond when you experience failure? Are you afraid to take risk because you're afraid you won't succeed. You know, I have to confess, I'm speaking to myself right now because I'm really kind of a perfectionist. And I try to be extraordinarily well prepared so that I don't risk failure. But you know, remember that failure is an event. It's not a person. And you're going to make some wrong decisions. You're going to give some bad advice someday. And maybe you've made some bad choices. And you've chosen maybe even the wrong major. But you're going to fail at times and times again. But don't remain fixed on those consequences, because sometimes failure is just a kind of a redirection on a road to another success. I read a book once it was entitled Failure, the Back Door to Success. You know, when I was thinking about the day that I graduated from college, I thought back to that day, and I'd have to tell you truthfully, that day at my graduation, I felt like a failure. I'm not proud to tell you this, but particularly those of you that are in my class, but I would have struggled in my own class because I wasn't a very dedicated student. I didn't study as much as I should. If you'd asked me what I was going to do when I got out of college, I would have said, well, I'm planning to go to medical school. I want to be a doctor. But when I got out of college, and that day in my graduation particularly, as I reflected, I knew I didn't have the kind of grades that would be competitive. And I was sad, and I was kind of depressed because I was a failure. Well, in an attempt to improve my academic standing, I decided to go to graduate school. And when I was at graduate school, after a while, they gave me a graduate teaching assistantship. And I started teaching general biology laboratories at the place that I was in graduate school. And you know what? It was like giving me crack cocaine. I was hooked instantly, and I loved it. And it hasn't changed. I mean, I loved it at 11 o'clock this morning. So that failure led me to something that was far better than I could ever imagine having done as a physician. You know, I told you a little bit about when I came to Auburn, and right before that time, I'll be honest with you, I felt like a failure too. It was hard to get a job those days, and I had applied. We were married. We had 2 kids. I told you I didn't have any income virtually. And we were trying to find a job, and I'd applied many, many places. And I had a nice, thick folder of various ways to tell someone they were sorry. I don't think they were really that sorry, but that's what it said anyway. And it was from a whole gamut of places. I'd been rejected from Harvard University. I applied as a postdoc there, and I didn't get it. I was also rejected, though, at Dodge City Community College. My boss is sitting right over there, Dean Schneller, and you know, how does it feel to have an associate dean that got rejected from Dodge City Community College? We run a great organization there at COSAM. But it's true, I was. What added more insult to that injury was the fact that they let me know about the person they hired, and he was better qualified than I was. I felt like a failure. In fact, I remember the day that I went out to the post office box and I picked up a letter, and it actually was another one of the I'm sorry letters from the last place that I had applied. I had no other options. Came back in the house, waited a little while, and the phone rang. And there was a lady that worked in the department where I was a graduate student that said, Larry, we got a flyer here today from a place called Auburn University, and they're looking for a physiologist. And one thing led to another, and I came here, and I've been here ever since, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful ride. But you know, do I look at failing at Dodge City Community College? Would I trade that for having been at Auburn all these years? No way, no way. So expect failure from time to time. The third thing that I wished I'd heard that day was to be faithful in ordinary things. You know, it's easy to be faithful in the glamorous, but it's often more difficult to be faithful in the more ordinary, mundane things of life. F.B. Myers said, "Don't waste your time waiting and longing for the large opportunities which may never come, but faithfully handle the little things that are always claiming your attention." you're going to find out there's a lot of ordinary in life. Almost anything you can think of, there's lots of ordinary. Even people that got great, exciting jobs that you might think, there's a lot of ordinary. There's a lot of ordinary in your family. There's a lot of ordinary in relationships. There's just lots of ordinary. You know, today is an extraordinary experience for me. I will never forget this moment. But you know, the measure of my success is not whether I showed up for this lecture. The real measure of my success is I still got a stack of exams to grade. And I've got students in my class that want to see me about one thing or another. It's faithful in the ordinary. You know, I teach mammalian physiology, and as Rohan told you, it's not an easy class, that's for sure. And it also is a required class. And so sometimes students repeat the class. I call them my Physiology Alumni Association. And I usually talk to the Alumni Association, encourage them to do some things differently and try to improve and whatever. And you know, occasionally, I wish I could say it was every time, but occasionally I'll have someone that'll just turn it around unbelievably. And I have the habit of asking those people, saying, wow, what did you do? Because this is unusual. What did you do differently? And sometimes they'll say to me, well, I learned how to study. And I'll say to them, really? Well, tell me about it. Tell me this technique that works in this class, because I want to tell other people about it. You know what the answer always is? They didn't learn anything different. It was nothing extraordinary. They just studied and studied and studied. They were just faithful in the ordinary. The fourth thing that I would encourage you to do is don't neglect the spiritual side of your life. You know, you spent a great deal of time here in college developing yourself intellectually, socially, emotionally, physically. But I encourage you, as you go from here, don't neglect the spiritual dimension of your life. You know, I personally reject the notion that there's nothing transcendent or we can't discover truth. I encourage you to ask yourself tough questions in your own spiritual development. You know, I say that because, well, there's going to be times in your life when you may need some spiritual moorings to sustain you. Just recently, my wife Nancy was diagnosed with a serious illness, and she's subsequently been effectively treated. But I can tell you it wasn't my intellectual knowledge of physiology and anatomy. It wasn't whatever social graces I might have. Certainly wasn't my emotions. But it was really my spiritual bearings that sustained me through that. And I encourage you to develop those bearings yourself. A fifth thing I wish they had told me was that it's important to serve other people. You know, we live many times in a selfish society, a society that's screaming, do your own thing, or go for the gusto, or do it your way. And don't let the greed for more pleasure or more wealth deprive you the joy of serving other people and giving to others. You know, I think there's some benchmarks that you can look at to see if something truly is service. One of those is that I believe that servants should be willing to serve downward. Servants are willing to serve downward. You know, it's easy to serve people upward. Dean Schneller asked me, would you be willing to do this? I'm like, sure, I'd be happy to do it. Because, you know, he's my boss and he's in a position above me. But, you know, that really means for me, am I that anxious to serve my employees? Am I that anxious to serve the 2,900 COSAM students? Am I that anxious to serve the 200 or so students in my class that are asking me the question I've just answered 20 other times? The answer is, if I'm truly a servant, I should be as anxious to do that. Be as anxious to serve them as I am to serve Dean Schneller. A second benchmark for servants is that I believe they ought to be able to, or be willing to serve anonymously. I've read a poem once by Ruth Calkins called I Wonder, I Wonder. It's haunting. She says, how would I react, I wonder, If you pointed to a basin of water and asked me to wash the calloused feet of a bent and wrinkled old woman day after day, month after month, in a room where nobody saw and nobody knew. A third benchmark of true servants is that they are willing to serve and give generously. Shortly after World War II came to an end, Europe began picking up the pieces from the carnage. Much of the country was in ruins, and perhaps some of the saddest sights of all were the number of little orphan children who were starving in the streets of some of the war-torn cities. There's a story told of an American soldier who was stationed in London, and he was making his way back to the barracks one cold morning. As he was driving through the streets, he turned a corner, and he spotted a little boy. And that little boy was standing with his face right up against the window of a bakery. And inside that bakery, there was a man making donuts. The soldier parked his Jeep and got out and carefully and noiselessly came up behind the young boy. As he got there, the young boy sort of went, "Oh." And what had happened was that the baker had taken some freshly baked donuts and taken them and carefully put them into a display case. The soldier said to the little boy, "Son, would you like one of those donuts?" The boy said, Oh, would I love one of those donuts." And so the soldier went into the bakery. He bought a dozen donuts and put them in a bag and carried them out and handed them to the little boy. As the soldier turned to get into his Jeep, he felt kind of a tug on his coat. And he looked down at that little urchin. The boy looked up at him and said, "Sir, are you God?" Servants give generously. Every time I teach mammalian, I end the course in the same way. I read something that I ran across many years ago. It's actually written by an H.J. Morowitz. And it brings to light, I believe, the sixth thing that I wish they had told me when I graduated, and that is that it's okay to be yourself. You know, we spend a lot of time sometimes trying to be things we are not. And we do that because, well, frankly, we don't think it's good enough to be ourselves. And so I will then read this at the end of this, the last lecture. It says, "Another annual cycle inevitably passed, and the pain was eased by a humorous birthday card. The front bore the caption, 'According to biochemists, the materials that make up the human body are only worth 97 cents. I decided to make a thorough study of the entire matter. I started by sitting down with a catalog from a biochemical company and began to list the ingredients. Hemoglobin was $2.95 a gram, purified trypsin was $36 a gram, and crystalline insulin was $47.50 a gram. I began to look at slightly less common constituents, such as acetate kinase at $8,860 a gram. The real shocker came when I got to follicle-stimulating hormone at $4,800,000 a gram. For the really wealthy, there's prolactin at $17,500,000 a gram, street price. Not content with a brief glance at the catalog, I averaged all the constituents over the best estimate of their percentage in the composition of the human body and arrived at $245.54 as the average price of gram dry weight of human being. The next computation was done with a great sense of excitement. I had to multiply the price per gram by my dry weight. The number literally jumped out at me. $6,015,044. I was a $6 million man. we must somehow reconcile the 97-cent figure and the $6 million figure. The answer is, at the same time, very simple and very profound. Information is much more expensive than matter. And you are, at the molecular level, the most information-dense structures around, surpassing still many orders of magnitude the best that computer engineers can design or contemplate by miniaturization. You know, self-worth is an interesting topic, and for people your age, generally your self-worth is tied up into one of two things. The first is your physical appearance. Now, let me tell you, standing here and looking out, that the scenery in the direction I am looking is much better than the scenery you looking in my direction. Much better. But you know, I've got some news for you. It's all going to sag and wrinkle and not work as well as it once did. That's what's going to happen. And so beauty is, for physical beauty, is fleeting and really not even satisfying. What people, do I ask you, that spend the most money on trying to improve their looks? It's already the people that are great looking. And so beauty is really not very satisfying. The other is generally in some sort of performance. And for most of you, the students here anyway, you get a lot of your self-worth and identity based on how well you do in your classes. It's tied up in your grades. But you know, that really isn't satisfying, because even if you get all A's, the next thing you want is you want not just all A's, you want the highest A in the class. And let me ask you something, even those of you that maybe get 96 and 97s on tests, when you get it returned to you, what's the first thing you look at? Which ones did I get wrong? You don't look at the 97 that you got right, it's the ones you got wrong. And so, again, that's somewhat fleeting. You'll never really strive to the highest level you want based on your performance. And so I'm here to tell you this, the last lecture, that it's not because of what you do, it's not because of what you look like, but it's simply because of who you are. That each of you are $6 million men and women. Thank you.